Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. Um, in this particular episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happens when you have to come in on an employment type visa, which there's a whole world of immigration on how to come here on an employment visa. And what are the options when you don't have a sponsor? Okay, because you have to think about it realistically. If you're living in another country and maybe you've got years and years of experience and qualifications, but you can't find a sponsor, you can't find an employer willing to sponsor you, that's not unusual. It's difficult enough to find a job or an employer to sponsor you if you live inside the country or in the neighborhood of where the employer is, let alone 10,000 miles away in a different country. So if you happen to be one of those people who do have a lot of qualifications, but you can't find or get an employer to agree to sponsor you, then what other options might exist? Well, I'd like to briefly go over what is referred to as the EB-1 category. Now, first of all, what's EB stand for? Well, that's employment-based, okay, and 1 is the first category, or the first preference. So EB-1 is given the highest preference in immigration law, and for all intents purposes, the visa numbers are current. You don't have to wait years for them to become current. And as far as employers go, generally speaking, with EB-1, you do not need to have a separate employer that will be willing to petition you. So what exactly is the EB-1, and why does it get first preference over everything else, all the other employment-based preferences? Well, one reason is because the U.S. wants people who are in EB-1 category because, number one, and depending on which subsection of EB-1, it brings in money, it brings in the ability to have workers, it increases the economic base of the U.S. In other respects, it brings in people who are the best at what they do, and that alone is a good reason to bring them in. So the EB-1 is not for people who basically are right out of college, or who don't have a lot of experience, or who don't have a lot of years behind their belts. Although there are exceptions to that, that's generally it. So if you're such a person who has a lot of years of experience, who is really good at what you do, and you can't find a sponsor, then perhaps the EB-1 is for you. So let's break it down a little bit so you understand the categories or the divisions, the subsections of EB-1. Well, first is EB-1A. What is EB-1A? Okay, that is referred to as persons of extraordinary ability. Okay, now persons of extraordinary ability, they don't need to have a sponsor, none. But on the other hand, you need to show you are pretty much at the top of your field of whatever it is that you do. Now, there's no need, no requirement that you have a college degree, and no requirement you be the manager or executive of some big corporation. But it is difficult to prove an EB-1. I don't want to tell you it's a slam dunk piece of cake, no problem, easy case to get approved. In fact, it's sort of the opposite, that it does take a considerable amount of work. There needs to be a lot of evidence, and you need to be able to show that in fact you are an extraordinary ability alien at the top of your field. So one thing that I do right off the bat is, let's say you're some kind of engineer. You obviously don't want to get a EB-1A, extraordinary ability, by showing that you are the best engineer in the world. It's too broad. There's no way you're going to show that. So narrow it down. If you work, for example, in airplanes, narrow that down too. You know, an aeronautical engineer, but let's say you work on, you know, a certain kind of airplane. And let's say within that certain kind of airplane, you work on a certain part within the airplane. Let's say you work on electronic systems and wing controls on certain airplanes. Well, that certainly does narrow it down a lot a bit. And maybe you are near the top of your field in that particular respect. So in order to show that you're an extraordinary ability, there's basically a list of several things that you have to show. It does give basically a standardized list of what you're supposed to show, but you only need to show 3 in which to at least statutorily qualify. But I can tell you that if you have more, which generally people do, you need to put everything that you possibly can in there, because sometimes people misunderstand and think all they do is show 3 and they're automatically in, and that's not the case. Okay, I mean, just briefly, they have to show, you know, awards, of course, other than a Nobel Prize, but they show awards that are nationally or internationally recognized, you know, membership in various associations that, you know, to be a member shows you have outstanding achievement, published materials about that person, that you participated as a judge in the work of others, evidence of scientific, scholastic, artistic, or business-related contributions of major significance, authorship of scholarly articles, artistic exhibitions or showcases, performance in leading or cultural role for the organization, a high salary compared to others, you know, commercial success, and then of course there's the catch-all. So I mean, you know, a lot of those are ambiguous, which is good, because then, you know, there's ways of fitting in, legally speaking, items which you've done in one of these categories to show that you've met it. So if you get the EB-1A, then essentially you have to agree to come to the U.S. and work in the same field, but you are not required to have a sponsor. You're not required to do the PERM or the, you know, and so forth, which generally for EB3 categories is going to take many years to become current. So it's really a very good item here, and a lot of people shy away from it because they think that they can't do it. But if you give me a call, you know, the first thing I do is I say, send me your CV, your resume, experience, your publications, all that stuff, and then I can see if there's a realistic possibility, because if you have a chance to come in on an EB-1A as an extraordinary alien and then go work in your field, but wherever in your field you want to, it many times is much more preferable than having to get a sponsor and, you know, essentially have the intent to work for that sponsor forever and wait years for it to become current. So there's a lot more we can talk about the EB-1A, and I've done several videos on it, so you can go ahead and look at those as to examples and how to do it. But I would like to, for now, this video, just concentrate briefly on the EB-1A categories. So another one is the outstanding professor and researcher. Okay, of course this deals with persons who are recognized internationally as outstanding in a specific academic area. So again, we have to narrow it down. You of course don't want to try and say math, okay, that's where you happen to be. You want to narrow it down. Maybe it's integral calculus, and then maybe with that it's integral calculus physics based for, you know, certain engineering majors. So you know, if you narrow it down a lot, then you're able to have a much better chance of getting it approved. So basically with this one, you of course have to have at least 3 years experience in teaching or researching in the academic area, which, you know, honestly that's pretty minimal if you're going to be getting an EB-1 category for, and remember, this is for the green card. It's not a work permit, it's not temporary, it's permanent for the green card if you happen to qualify. So with this particular EB-1 category, of course, you do have to have a sponsor, and the sponsor is with a university or an institution of higher education where you are offered a tenure position or a tenure track position to come on and continue in that same area, that you have done the research and that you have done the particular teaching. And so there's different ways of showing it, which again, I'll just briefly list, receipt of major prizes or awards for outstanding achievement, membership in an association which requires outstanding achievement, published material in professional publications written by others about your work, and then evidence of your participation as a judge of work of others, evidence of original scientific research, and then of course authorship of scholarly books or articles in the field. So again, there's all kinds of cases defining each one of these categories, and sometimes it's more strict or less strict, but of course if you think that you are in this category, and the way that you minimally do it is if you have 3 years experience and you got a 10-year track offer to come to the US, okay? If you have those two things, then again, email me, get a consultation. I'll look at your items and see if there's a reasonable possibility of going through and trying to make it happen. Now, what is the other area that we have to consider here? The only other EB-1 category, well, that's known as EB-1C, and it's multinational executives and managers. And it's really just what it says. It's a person who has a company or who works for a company as an executive or manager, and that same company opens a branch office in the US of some nature, and then that same person comes and is an executive or manager over here. Now, I know I made that sound real easy, but there's lots of evidence that is needed in order to successfully push forward with this. But just as a side note, for those people considering the EB-5, which is to invest $1 million or $500,000 in a regional center, if they have their own business or are in one of these categories, the amount of money for investing in this is much less. And technically, you don't really need a sponsor, especially if you own your own business. It's your business that is going to be submitting the paperwork. And if you happen to work for someone who wants to transfer you over, essentially you already have the, you're already working for the sponsor, basically. So with the multinational manager and executive, of course, there's lots of documentation that has to go forward with what your duties are, that you are in fact an executive and or manager, what kind of manager or executive and so forth, and that you're going to continue the same types of duties once you come into the U.S. Again, no labor certification, no PERM, none of that is required, no waiting list, it's all current, okay? And, as far as the executive capacity, of course, you have to show that you have directed the management of the organization or a component or function of that organization. There's all kinds of laws on that. You have to establish goals and policies. You exercise wide latitude and discretionary decision making, and you only receive general supervision or direction from higher level executives, boards of directors, or stockholders. So there's all different kinds of things that need to be proven, but again, what I'm showing here is that with the EB-1, the category does exist to allow people who have basically blazed the trails behind them to come into the U.S. much more rapidly, and we're talking years more rapidly than other categories of employment-based visas. So if you think you might qualify for this, or you wondering if there's a chance, give me a call and we'll set up a consultation. Email me your questions, and if you like the video, click like, and I usually put, subscribe to my channel. I usually put out a new video once every week. Okay, more on the coming videos.